Hey there, Russ here. Welcome back to the shop. Okay, today I want to talk about these little fellows right here. This is a Wago lever nut. Wago is a brand name. They're really called lever nuts because there's other brands. In fact, I call the Wago brand Wagos, and I call all the rest of them grays because all the rest of them, instead of having look like this, the body is gray and then the levers are a different color. So, and we'll talk about that in detail in a little bit. Anyway, basically the Wago, they come in, this is the straight connector. The wires both go in on this side here. So when they come out, you connect the wire to it, they look like that. And they're going the same direction. They also have a connector out there where it's called an inline, where instead you can take two wires, in other words, take two connectors that you want and connect them together using this. It just passes straight through. So you connect the red to the red and the black to the black, and everything is just nice and connected. So, and that's called an inline connector. Now you can get this in multiple terminals, up to, and probably even bigger, but so far the most common ones is 2, 3 terminals, and 5 terminals. So, but it's still basically the same. All the wires go in the same direction on the regular connector. So, and there's been some changes on this. Now, first off, a little history here. I learned about electrical current, and my experience came from being an auto mechanic in an earlier life. And I was always stuck with doing the electrical work. And I think that's because for some reason it was easy for me to figure it out. Mechanics hate electrical work back then. They hated it. If there was something that had to do with wiring, they went into panic mode. But me, it wasn't a problem. I had no problem figuring out problems with the electrical systems on cars. And I'm talking about on regular gasoline cars. It was a 12-volt system. There was some 24 volt, but most of it was 12. And I learned to work on that stuff. So back in those days, instead of having lever connectors, everything was a crimp. And the automobile is the worst place to put any kind of two wires connected together. Because you have the vibration factor, the temperature changes extremely from one extreme to the next on these connectors, and all these things can make those connectors go bad. So that's what stop. Here. Now go away. Go on. Yes, it's Missy. So all these connectors that they had back then, they really were under a lot of stress because of those factors, and you get a lot of problems with connections just quit working over a period of time sometimes. So, but that's what you had to deal with in those days. You had to trace the wire down, go from connector to connector, and make sure that the juice is going all the way through. So, and I was pretty good at doing that stuff. So that's what, as a mechanic, I did a lot of the electrical work. But I also remember that those connectors, the crimping connectors, really are, they are not the most dependable way of doing a connector. Now, you could solder, and I had to do some soldering, but I will tell you, even then and now, I hate soldering, and I would rather not solder, and I'll do whatever I can to avoid soldering, quite frankly. So, anyway, these connectors, actually, what's amazing about them is that they've been around since they got their UL approval in 2003. Wago did, first one. So they've been around for quite a while. But they've been around, I think, mostly in the AC field. They were used, mostly designed for electricians inside of electric boxes and that sort of thing to make connections, instead of using those horrible wire nuts. That was the other thing that you could use. Besides a crimping connector, you could go to a wire nut. But anyway, but that was just as bad, wire nut, and it still is. So this, I think, other than the cost, is such a great solution to connecting two wires together and dependably. And you can do it both temporarily and then take it back apart later and reuse them, or you can put it on there permanently and you don't have to be afraid of it ever coming loose or going bad at that connector. Chances of that is very slim as opposed to like a crimping connector. So these are really awesome to have around. And if you have a small shop and you do some electrical stuff, you gotta have these around. And lately I've noticed, well, first off, I want to say one thing about the 2003 when these came out. I didn't learn about these until about 2 or 3 years ago. Where have I been? Anyway, but I really like them, and I found so many uses since then that I use them for both temporary connections and even on permanent connections. I'm not afraid to use this in either of those two environments, and I can reuse it over and over and over in the temporary connections. So they're really handy to have around, much better than the crimping type connectors. And since I was I don't do a lot of electrical work. I don't do any PCB stuff at all. My soldering is so bad that I would avoid doing that kind of work. But I do a lot of wiring, where you're actually hooking wires and components together rather than using circuit boards. So, and that's the sort of thing I enjoy doing. These things are just the best thing come along for that sort of thing since they came out with copper wire. So, anyway, what are the different connectors that you can get? I have found that around here, they have been changing. Instead of having just this connector, then they came out with the inline connector. And now they're doing all sorts of really cool stuff. In fact, you can buy a 110 outlet that has these lever connectors on there instead of the old-fashioned screw or the push-in one where it just pushes in and it hooks the wire. These things are the lever connectors. So watch for those now in your electrical outlets, because they do definitely make it much easier to put an outlet in if you got that kind of connector on it. The biggest problem is right now with that is that they are a little more expensive than the old style. So it's going to take a while for those things to come down. I think they're around $3.50 for the one with the lever connectors, and you can buy the regular duplex outlets for under $2 most of the time and get a good quality connector plug-in. Now, I will say that from what I can see, that lever connector on the sockets on the outlet are a high quality unit so far, but I'm sure there's going to be copies made of that, and those are going to be the cheapies, just like anything, to help bring the price down. But they actually are a good alternative to the old-fashioned one if you really want to use it. And they do make it much easier to get all that wire shoved back into that box when you're putting one of those in to a box that has a lot of wires in it. So there are two basic, let's call it brands out there as far as I'm concerned. There's the Wago, and Wago is the brand name, just like Crescent wrench. Crescent is actually a brand name. If you were going to describe it, it is a adjustable wrench. And so Crescent is actually a brand name, but it's been associated to the adjustable wrench phrase in the same way. Well, that's what's happened, I think, to a certain extent with the Wagos. They call them Wagos, but they may be talking about other type of lever nuts. So, but there are two types. There is the Wago itself, which is very distinctive in what they look like. And then you have all the rest, which I call the grays. They're all gray-bodied, and I have a bunch of those. I do tend to buy these. First off, let me say that I do have some Wagos on hand. I carry the 5-terminal ones, which are these, and I carry the 2-terminal ones. And the only reason I do that is because all the grays that I have seen out there in these connectors, the largest wire you can use in it is a 12 gauge. The Wagos, you can go down to a 10 gauge. So there are times when I gotta have this instead because I'm using 10 gauge wire. But if I can avoid using these, I tend to do that, and I stick to the grays because those actually are still much, much less expensive than these are. Now, these do have a rating. The Wagos have a rating of 41 amps, I believe. And the grays all seem to be around 32 amp rating on those. So if you're worried about what kind of power you can put through them, most of the time, if you're at a 12 gauge wire or less, probably 32 is more than enough to hold it. And I've seen some testing out there, and I'm still trying to find more of that testing on all these different units and see what kind of tests that people have come up with when they test to see what it takes to actually get one of these to fail. And they've been quite impressive. They seem to be holding up as well, if not better, than the actual wire itself does when it comes time to having a failure. Seems like the wire burns up before the connector does in most cases. So I'm not afraid to use these, and I do tend to use the grays because they're less expensive. Anyway, so I do carry, these are the inline ones that I carry. Now, what's weird is that these come in a blue and orange, which I don't know why they don't make that black and white or black and red, but it is what it is. So I always put the positive, the red one, in the orange side, and I put the ground wire, the negative side, on the blue side on these connectors when they're gray and blue. So I always look at that, and that's what I see is positive and negative, orange and blue. So I did carry, I bought a pack of these, 24, and I've been using them. These are very handy for doing, I use these a lot. And you'll see, I'm going to show you some examples, and you'll see where I use these quite a bit in my wiring stuff. But this is just one of the ones I carry. I also carry the straight one, which is also a 2, 3, and 5 lever connectors. So this is all one. It would be all the positive or all the negatives in these. And I have them in all 3 sizes of 2 terminal, 3 terminal, and 5 terminal in this little kit here. And that's what I started with, and that's what I've been using for a long time. Well, recently I found they're actually coming out with some pretty cool stuff, because sometimes if you want to add some wiring to something, you really got to bring, instead of a 2-wire connector, you got to go to a 3-wire or a 4-wire connector. So instead of using one of these, you got to go to this. The problem is, when you use these, all the wires are coming out the same direction, and if you're in a tight area, that one wire is going to make a big U-turn probably after it comes out. But they have come out with a couple of new ideas on these. This is one of them right here. They got 1 going one direction and 3 going the other. This is actually a handy connector at time to use when you're working in a tight area and trying to put together some component, and you're wiring all your stuff together or adding something to an already a circuit that's out there, and you want to add more wires to it. This would be your source, and these would be your distribution of wires. So it's nice to have this where it goes bi-directional for the wire. These are handy to have around. So I went ahead and bought some of these. I haven't used any of these yet, but that's something new that I've just recently found out there. I don't know when they started making all these different configurations, but also they seem to have stopped making this one, which is just a 2-wire inline connector. But they have come up with this one, which actually is even cooler, because this is actually 2 separate connectors, and they go together with a if you can do it, they go together with a little dovetail connection, and you can put them on either side, or you can gang a bunch of them together. If you have a bunch of wires you want to pass through, you can put 2 or 3 together. Now I found these in not only the blue and the orange, but they also have them where they have the yellow one in there in the packet if you want to go with 3 colors. In fact, they have 4 or 5 colors, I think, of these. The only thing is, you can only buy them in the packs of a variety of color. I wish you could buy them in singular, so I could buy all blue and all red, so I can, if I'm using mostly these 2, I can replenish these 2 only. So anyway, that's neither here or there. But these are really kind of nice little connectors now, and they actually are an improvement on these. Also, big improvement, you see that little hole? That's so you can put a probe in there and check your power easily. And on the old one, you couldn't do that. And it's even really, they have it on here, but it's really hard to find a place and get that connector. In fact, I don't see it on this one, where you can connect the power by probing it. No, I don't see one on here. That's a surprise. I thought they had it on the Wago, the probe. But that way you can connect the power and see if you got power at the connector. So it gives you one more place to be able to check it easily without having to, once you connect the wires in, you can make sure that you got power at going through the connector. Anyway, I ramble on. But this is really a very, if I can get these all back in here. Uh-oh. Oh, that one doesn't go in there. Okay. So, and this is the other one that I bought. Now, they have a lot of other variations, too, that you can look at. You may find what you're looking for out there, but just put lever connector or lever nut for a search on Amazon, and you'll get tons of different variety of them. Here. Now go away. Go on. She was back. Anyway, so those are all the connectors. So how do you use them? What do you use them for? Well, they're really handy when I'm doing a lot of testing stuff, because you got to make up a lead. So you crimp your ends on both ends, you use it, then you get done and you throw that in a box because you don't need that connector for what you used it for testing. And then later on, oh, I only need this end, but I need a different on the other end. So now you cut it apart and you use only one, put a new one on there, crimp it on there, and your wire gets shorter and shorter. But actually, I can take, like here, I made a connector that is a cigarette lighter on one end, goes through an inline connector, and goes to an Anderson plug. But if I needed to, I could very easily change out either one of these and go to a banana connector instead and put that in there, so that now I have an Anderson to a banana. Or I can take, on the banana one, I can even put these alligator clips on it, and now I go to an alligator clip. And I didn't have to crimp up any more terminals. I used the ones I already have. So I tend to make all my connectors now singular. On one end, I just leave it stripped back so that I can connect any two connectors to each other for whatever it is I'm trying to do. So go lay down. Go on. No more. Go. Go lay down. She's sitting there just staring at me. She picked that up from Annie. I hate it when they do that. So anyway, I have found that that is really handy for making leads. But also, when I do some of my projects, like here, I wanted to have a quick connect for the Ryobi battery. And this is something I had bought. I threw a little voltmeter on here so that I can also read the voltage on it. And on the output, I just hot glued an inline one, put the wires into it, and now I have this. But if I want, instead of using the alligator clips, I could very easily grab an Anderson and turn this into an Anderson connector on my Ryobi instead. So it depends on what you like to use. Now, I want to say, connectors, these are my favorite by far of all different types out there. But if I have to go to a regular connector, I do really lean toward this fellow right here, especially when you start getting above 10 amps. When it's below 10 amps, I probably don't use this so much. Then I tend to turn to the barrel connector mostly. The barrel connector is a very good connector, and you can connect it, as I showed you on that light, by having a barrel connector on that fixture. I could also hook it up to solar generators somewhere. So, but anyway, you can see, you can find all sorts of uses. And even though I made this, rather than make another one with different leads on it, I can switch these leads out for another set of leads that I have instantly. And then this fits the new thing I'm trying to do with it. So I do use these a lot. I also use these in my project on permanent locations, where once I hook it up, I hot glue it down so it stays put. And I use this as my connector to connect one end to the other with the 2 wires. So, or when you have multiple wires going to on one circuit going to different places. So they're really handy to have around. I don't know what you think about all this. I probably rambled an awful lot about it, but I really do like these connectors. I wish I had these when I was younger. Man, I used to fight connectors so much that they would go bad later on, or find somebody else that had wired something up and their connector didn't work. That is a tough one to find on a circuit. It's somebody else's connector failure. So anyway, I could tell you stories all day long about being a mechanic and the things that I did and saw. So some of them are pretty funny. Anyway, rather than rambling any more about any of this, if you have any questions about any of this, any thoughts, here's one more example. This one I took, this is a power analyzer, and I can take this, if I make up a connector like this, and I want to take and be able to monitor what's going on between here, I can easily adapt this thing in between there. Use this instead of this connector. I can use this, which has its own connectors on it. And I could hook 2 ends to this so I can then monitor whatever it is I'm doing. So it makes it really nice to use these on everything and having only half connectors on one end only, so that I can put together some kind of connector. I can add an inline fuse real quick if I need to this way by using these. And everything comes together very fast and easy to set up, whether I want to switch it or not. One more quick thing. I got to show you this. This monstrosity here was one of the coolest things I have made for testing stuff. This is a blower motor switch out of an automobile. It just has an off, 1, 2, and 3 positions. So I marked the red to show where this is pointing on these red ones, the speed 3, 2, 1, and the off. The off, and then I took and connected to that a wire, and I connected the 4 different leads that go into it. The main one where the power is going in, just like you would on any switch. And then you have your first speed, second speed, and third speed. And I marked them for these connectors. So I can actually hook up this thing in sequence here. So if I wanted to put a switch on this, I could hook this up here and hook it up to one place, hook up a second connector to another location, and I can actually do multiple items to see what kind of power, or I can change the source, run something off of 12 volts and then run it off of 18 volts if I wanted to off of this unit. So it really is very handy. I'm going to make a nice one and then I'll show you, but this has actually been very handy for me to put together circuits to try to test things, especially LED lights and things like that. It's really kind of handy to have around. And I did stick a secondary connector on here. So if I'm running DC volts, I can plug all my positives in here, and I plug all my negatives in here, so that I have all my wiring in one little location. But stay tuned. We're going to turn this into a really nice little tool to have in your electric shop when you get done, to have multiple switches instantly that you can hook up into your work. So no matter what kind of mad experiment you're trying to do, it'd be easy to get a switch on it to turn it on and off. So stay tuned for that. These are just some of the things that I've done with these connectors though, and you can see they are very handy to have, and they're very easy to lock down and tie down with a little bit of hot glue too, without hurting it or having a problem. So the only thing I wish I could do is I wish I could find a good shrink wrap that I could slide over the whole thing and shrink this down. Most of the heat shrinks that go over this won't go over these wires. So I would like to have some way to put some kind of cover on there and protect it. I may have to come up with something on my own, but that's the only thing about these, is that I would like to see some kind of protector around it, so that if I'm going to use it on a semi-permanent basis, I can actually cover them up and protect them then from the possibility of weather. and humidity. So, other than that, that's it. Like I say, I find more uses all the time. So, anyway, I want to thank you for coming by. Leave your thoughts, your comments, your ideas. And if you find any videos where they're testing these things, I would love to, you just drop me a quick comment on any of my videos, because I'm always looking for the new comments. And if you leave me a new comment, I'll get it right away. So you can put that comment on any of my videos about where you found somebody where they were testing these, because I'd like to see a little more on the testing, especially of the grays, and what kind of load they get under that they can hold up on the DC current especially. A lot of the testing I've seen is on AC circuits. I'd like to see some a lot more DC circuit testing on those things to see what they won't do. So anyway, any comments or thoughts, leave them down below. I do enjoy reading them all. If you learned something here or you like this video, hit that like button. Lets me know that I'm doing something right. Most importantly, though, please come back again, because I'm nowhere near done. Thanks. We'll see you guys again very soon.